This is what we're going to make today. It's a flask for holding green sand, or I actually use Petrobond sand, and you put your patterns in here and I pour aluminum into them. So this is what we're going to be making. Got a couple of boards here that these are some that I milled a couple of years ago in a sawmill. So we're going to use these and cut them up to start making the flasks. The flasks are going to be 14 by 14, so I'm going to cut these up into, so let's see, 18 inches to give us some extra till we get them all planed, and then we can cut them down. Okay, that'll work out. All right, let's get these to the right thickness. Okay, that's just a little over 3/4, and I got good edges on all sides, so I think I'm going to stop right there. Might as well leave them as strong as possible. All right, we're going to move this out of the way and get set up on the table saw. Using this wood, you've got to spend a lot of time. You got to trim the bark off and then cut your boards. So I'll have to change the fence around quite a bit. Get plugged in there. Fire up the suction. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Awesome. Okay. That's one entire flask worth of sides right there. Turn that blower off. Okay, we want to make 2 flasks. So I'm going to repeat that whole process to make the second one. We've got our 16 pieces cut for the flask. The next thing I got to do is square up one end, and then we'll get them all measured to length. All right, they all have one end trimmed, and now we got to measure them up. Now we're going to make, I want these flasks to be 14 inches inside. So we've got to figure out, let's see what the thickness of 2 of these is, because we know it's a little bit over because we didn't plane them quite. Okay, so it's they're actually 1/8 over, so it's 1 3/4 length. So that means that when you, okay, so you put 2 like this, and then 1 goes on top of the other 2, like that. So for this to be 14 inches in here, this board, the inside boards will be 14 inches, and the outside boards will actually need to be, let's see, 14 plus 1 inch and 3/4. So that's going to be 15 3/4. So we need to measure out, let's see, I'm going to write that down here, 15 3/4. Okay, so let's look at these boards and see. See, this one's got some cracking on the end, so we're going to cut that one as short as possible. So that's going to be a 14. Most of them, it isn't going to matter. That'll make a good 14. None of these matter. And you can see, like, this board right here has got a little bit of bark left on it right there. Doesn't matter. It's still got a really good solid core. So that was one of those that just barely made a 4-inch board. See, that one's got a knot and some craziness on one end, so I'm going to cut that one as short as possible. Okay, so the rest of these, they don't really matter. Okay, so we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We need one more. That's 8. Okay, so we're going to mark all of these. 14. Well, now I got them all stirred around. I'm not sure which is the square end. Shoot. All right, so that's a good end. So we'll do that first. We're going to cut 1 to 14, and then we're going to use it to mark all of the other ones. Get a finer pencil. All right, I'm going to pull these gloves off so I can feel a little bit better. All right. Okay, those are all marked. I'll get those trimmed off. We're going to screw these together. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a countersink, because the screws are going to go right on the edge of the board, and they'll crack this board, or they'll crack it if we don't countersink it first. Do a pilot hole and countersink it. So what we're going to do is use this board to show us. That gives us a line that shows us how much room we have to put that into. We're going to do that on both ends. And then we're going to come back and countersink them all. Okay. Whew. Holy cow. That was a workout. So these are going to go together just like that.
I lost the video to most of the rest of this, but this is just showing the end of the flask where we need to put some pins to line it up so that when you make your pattern, you can put that in there, and then when you put it back together to pour it, it's exactly in the same place. So I'm taking some 1x2s and I'm just going to mark those out for the length that those pins need to be. I'm just making them out of wood, and they'll be screwed to the ends of those flasks. So I'm going to get those marked and then get them cut out on the miter saw, and then we'll move to the table saw. Okay, so here we are at the table saw, and I've got the miter gauge set at 45 degrees, and we've got to cut corners on these pins to help them line up, help you align them when you put the flask on top of another. You'll see that at the end, but the first thing I'm doing is just making a cut into the board that's on my miter gauge so I can line up the pin, get it where I want it. I've put a block back behind it so that I can make every one of them exactly the same, and then we'll start trimming those off. Get that first corner knocked off, and the other one, and now we'll speed up and get all of these taken off. Alright, so that was the longer pins, and these are all the shorter pins. Now we've moved over to the bench, and this is one of the half of the flasks. It's important that you get that first long pin straight. So I just took a square and marked that line. So now what I'm showing you here is I want to put a bevel on the back side of that pin, because when you go to line these two halves up, that bevel makes a really big difference, making it just that much easier to slide them together. You'll kind of see that here at the end. But what I'm doing now is just I'm going to take and mark the length that they need to be, so that then I can do some pre-drilling on them. So that's just taking a little piece of the flask and lining it up on there and making a mark to show me how much of that's going to be sitting on the flask, so that I can drill some pilot holes and some countersinks. When you're using short wood like this, it's important that when you put your screws in, you do a pilot hole so that you don't crack it. And this is pine, and it splits pretty easy, so that's why I'm going to drill these pilot holes in there. And that pencil mark just keeps me getting them in a place where they're going to attach well. So we'll get those knocked out real quick. Alright, now we're going to get them put on, put a little glue on there. We're going to use that line that we made earlier with the square to line them up. These are the longer pins, and they're going to hang over the edge. So I'm getting those put on first. Get them all screwed down. Alright, now that's the two smaller pins, and they go on the bottom half of the flask. And it's important that they just line up to that longer pin, so that when you push it down in there, it just slides down in between those two shorter pins. And they're shorter, so you'll see later when you build the flask, it's important for that one side of the flask to be flat when you put it down against a board. So that's why those are shorter, and they don't stick up above the edge of that half of the flask. Alright, so here we are. We've got them all drilled and screwed on there, and we're going to slide it together. That's where the bevels come in handy. Right there is lining all that up and make it slide together. Now I'm marking them. It's important that you know which way your flask goes together. So I made two. So there's an A flask and a B flask. And then I'm marking the ends of the pins so I know which ones line up with which one. So that's A flask, and that's the A side of the A flask. And now I'm marking the other side and the other flask. And now you can see that's the B flask, the A side of the B flask. Now, I found once I got them put together that there was some rocking in them. They're not quite square, and that's because there was some twist in those boards that I used to build them with. So I'm going to stack them one on top of another, and then I'll weight them down overnight, and we'll come back tomorrow and see how they did. And the rest of it is the original narration.
So after sitting overnight, they don't rock anymore, which is great. So they're ready to use.